wondering today if you have a relationship that you're in that feels like it has a lot of conflict. Maybe it's a professional working relationship, or maybe it's a personal relationship. And it feels like there is tension and conflict and it's just out of balance. What I'm going to share with you today are some thoughts about how to deal with that conflict from a new perspective. And the perspective that I want to share with you today is that when there is conflict in a relationship, it's not negative or bad. Instead, I'm going to invite you to try in the perspective that conflict is an indication of something trying to happen in that relationship. It's a very different perspective to try on. And it's one that allows you, hopefully, to step into a place of curiosity instead of judgment or anger or fear or blaming or contempt. Now, last week we talked about boundaries and how when you can set boundaries, healthy boundaries, you're able to stay in a relationship and be more compassionate instead of becoming resentful or angry. And when you don't have healthy boundaries and that resentment is growing, what happens, and if it's unaddressed, what happens is there are toxins that start to show up. I'm going to share with you some research from Dr. John Gottman, and he's with the Gottman Research Institute. And what he has done is studied relationships for decades and found that there are 4 toxins that show up in relationships where the conflict is unaddressed, where it's not handled in a positive way. Now, here's what's important to know is that what I'm going to share with you, these 4 toxins, they show up in all your relationships. But where they become toxic is when they are left unaddressed. And when you're not looking at a positive way to try to figure out what's trying to happen in this relationship. So let me give you an overview. I'll tell you what the 4 toxins are, and then I'll go a little deeper into each of them. So 4 toxins are blaming, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So I want you to think for a moment about if you have a relationship that feels like there's conflict and it's out of balance, which of these toxins are showing up? And I also invite you to think about which is your favorite. Often, most of us have a default. One of these that's our go-to. And when I do corporate workshops and trainings with teams who are trying to figure out how to behave in a healthier way and how to deal with the conflict in a positive way, I invite people to identify their favorite. And what I do is I put a grid on the floor and have one of each of these toxins in each of the 4 grids and have them physically move to the one that they do best. That's their favorite. So I want you to be thinking as I'm sharing about these, which one is your go-to? Because as we talk about these toxins and then the antidotes, what do you do if there's conflict in your relationship and you notice these toxins are becoming prevalent and they're showing up? The place to start, always, and if you've watched any of my Facebook Live videos over the last several months, you'll know that the place to start is with your own behavior. So we can't, or it's not as effective or healthy to listen to this video and then say, that's what my spouse needs to do differently. That's what my boss needs to learn. Now, that might be true. I don't deny that. But that's generally not going to be well received if you step into a mindset that this relationship could be better if you would be different, if you would change. Because we don't have the ability to change another person. But what's beautiful about this perspective, as hard as it is to say, wait a minute, I got to start with me, is that as you start to show up differently in a relationship, it can have a positive influence on how the other person shows up. So you can't control them, but when you focus on what you do control, your own behavior, your emotions, your reactions, you can influence how they show up in the relationship. So let's take a look at each of these toxins individually. Now, Gottman calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse because they become deadly. So the first one is blaming or criticism. And this is toxic because it focuses on the person instead of the behavior. So blaming someone instead of sharing what your frustration is, what your complaint is. Criticism, blaming, focuses on the person. A complaint focuses on the action. So it's very different to say, for instance, I'm frustrated that you told me this report would be done by noon today, and it's not done. Versus, oh, you never get me the reports on time. Criticism versus complaint. When you notice that there's blaming and criticism in the relationship, I'm going to share with you just a tip for each of these 4 toxins and what can you do. And for blaming and criticism, one of the things that you can do is use a soft startup. So the research shows that how a conversation starts indicates how it's going to end. So if it starts harshly, chances are it's going to end harshly. So a soft startup is a way to enter the conflict in a way that the other person can hear it, can receive it. So instead of, why didn't you get that report done? A soft startup might be something like, hey, do you have a minute? I'm wondering if we can talk because I'm feeling a little bit frustrated about this report, and I want to see if we can talk through it. The chances of getting to an outcome that is going to be more positive will increase if you can start with a soft startup. If you can come in and neutralize your frustration and your anger and enter the conversation so the other person doesn't immediately feel attacked and criticized. Now, what often happens when there is blaming in a relationship is it evokes the second toxin, which is defensiveness. Why didn't you get that report done? Can evoke a response of defensiveness. Well, I didn't get it done because I didn't get what I needed from Joe, or because you didn't fill in the blank. Defensiveness is really a way of blaming someone or something else. It's a way of not taking any personal responsibility. Now, you might feel like what you're being blamed for is not true, and you want to get defensive because you're feeling unjustly blamed. That's okay. That might be the case. The question I have for you, though, is do you want to be right, or do you want to be in a relationship? Now, there might be times when you decide you don't want to be in a relationship, where you have done everything you can, and you've set healthy boundaries, and you communicated, and the other person isn't responding, and maybe that's a case where you need to move on, where you need to leave your job or walk away from the relationship. So the place I'm coming from is assuming that you do indeed want to be in a relationship, not get revenge or be right. So if you're noticing that defensiveness is showing up, what do you do? Well, there's 2 things I'm going to share with you. There's lots of things, but I don't want this to be a 3-hour video. First thing that you can do is what I call active listening or curious listening. Because if you jump in with defensiveness, the other person hasn't doesn't feel like you really are hearing them. So first thing you can do is repeat back what you're hearing. Oh my gosh, I can hear you're really frustrated that this report isn't done, and I can honor that frustration. Connect with them. Second thing that you can do is something that's called the 2% rule. And this is something I learned when I went through my systems coach training from CRR Global. And it's a concept called the 2% truth. So if you're feeling like someone's blaming you or criticizing you for something and you are getting defensive, want to invite you to think about what's the 2% truth here. If only 2% of what they were criticizing me about were true. And it allows you to stay in a place of being open to influence, of being curious, of being able to stay in relationship instead of getting furious. So really all of these toxins, the underlying antidotes are to be open to influence and to stay curious instead of getting furious. What happens when there's blaming and criticism and defensiveness and this cycle continues in a relationship that has a lot of conflict is it can produce the third toxin, which is contempt. Contempt, Dr. Gottman says, is the most poisonous of the 4 toxins because it is now an attack on the person's character. Instead of, I'm frustrated that you didn't get this report to me, it's, you're an idiot. You never follow through on what you say you're going to do. So when contempt shows up, and it can show up in lots of different ways, sarcasm, name calling, bullying, there's all different ways that contempt shows up in personal and professional relationships. You have to make a commitment to stop. That is number 1. You have to see how toxic it is to go to this place of contempt. And stay in a place of being connected, of using active listening, of getting curious, of asking questions. And when you don't do that, and contempt is showing up, what that can evoke is the 4th toxin. The 4th relationship toxin or team toxin is stonewalling. Now, stonewalling in its most extreme form is disengaging. It's storming out of the room and slamming the door shut. But there are also more subtle forms of stonewalling as well. Stonewalling could be sitting back in a meeting, rolling your eyes, disengaging, giving body language that is showing that you have disengaged. Stonewalling can also be passive aggressive, not responding to an email, not returning a call. And oftentimes, stonewalling shows up when there's conflict in a relationship because the person is flooded. Because emotionally, they can't stay engaged. All of that energy that when you aren't feeling attacked, where the blood flow and the energy is in your brain and you're able to sort of think creatively about what's needed in this relationship and how do I stay engaged, what happens is historically, it goes back to when we feel threatened in nature. So we are biologically programmed to have fight or flight. So when you were out in the woods, or our ancestors, hundreds, thousands of years ago, were out in the woods and they felt attacked, 1 or 2 things generally would happen. You'd either freeze, you play dead, the bear is there, or you gear up to fight. And what happens in your body is all of that blood that's flowing in your creative mind of how do I want to show up leaves your brain and goes to your arms and your legs and your extremities so that you can really feel ready to fight. Adrenaline goes up, your heart rate starts to pound, you probably start to sweat, your face starts to get red, and your ability to stay creative and engaged and in connection and in relationship with the other person is gone. Because now you are in fight or flight mode. So what do? If you notice that one of your favorite toxins that you do best, it's the most prevalent when we're in conflict, is to stonewall, to disengage, is first of all recognize that you might be flooded emotionally. And then to request a break. Instead of being passive aggressive and not responding or storming out, you can share with the other person that you're feeling angry, triggered, frustrated, that you're flooded. And you can request a break. You can request a time out. And that may be that you say, you know what, I'm just feeling really frustrated and angry right now, and I don't think that I can respond in the best way. Can we just take a break and come back in an hour? Can I call you back? Can we reconvene tomorrow after I've had a chance to just sort of process and think through this and calm down? But the key is, if you request a break or a timeout, is that you come back at the time that you have promised to come back and that you re-engage. And ideally, you do it with a soft startup. It's all about what we talked about last week, setting a healthy boundary and saying, I need a break right now. I need some time to calm down, to relax, to think. And there's some research that shows that once you've gotten to that place where you are triggered, you're angry, you're defensive, you are feeling like you're flooded, that it takes on average 20 minutes for your body physiologically to be able to calm down, for your blood to sort of go back to your brain, where you can then again think consciously about how you want to respond. So in the Thoughtfully Fit model, this is all about how can you be more thoughtful in your life and more mindful of yourself and with others. This is all about agility. It's about being able to respond effectively instead of reacting by default, reacting on autopilot. You get triggered, you blame, you disengage, you criticize, you get defensive. It's about being able to pause. That pause might be in the moment, take in a deep breath, or you may have to request a pause and then think about what's needed here from the lens of yourself and the lens of the other person. So thinking, why am I triggered? What's so frustrating about this situation that has this other person feeling so angry? What's needed here for us to stay in relationship? Again, conflict isn't negative or bad. It's an indication of something trying to happen in this relationship. So you can pause and think about, gosh, what is trying to happen here? And then you act from that place of new awareness. Because when you have new awareness, you have access to different actions. You're not on autopilot. You're not reacting. You are consciously responding. So my challenge and invitation to you this week is to notice if there's a relationship that you're in that has a lot of conflict. What's trying to happen? And to stay in a place of curiosity. And notice if you are demonstrating one of these 4 toxins, these 4 horsemen. What can you do to show up differently? To break this cycle blaming, criticism, defensiveness, contempt, stonewalling, to be able to pause and think about how might I show up differently, and then act from that new awareness. Because when you show up differently, it can have a positive influence on the other person. And if you do this and you give it a try, let me know how it goes. Shoot me an email, make a comment in the comments below. If you succeed, let us know. What did you do? Or if you fail fabulously, that's a great opportunity to self-reflect, because the pause, think, act is a loop. It keeps going. You pause, you think, you act, and then you pause and think about, how did that go? What did I do well? How might I tweak it next time? And then you act again. So it's this continuous loop. You pause, think, act, and then pause and think about, how did it go? What do I need to tweak next time? And then you act with that new awareness. I also want to end today's Thoughtfully Fit live video with an invitation to join me on August 23rd for a free webinar that I'm doing, where I'm going to be talking about how to be thoughtfully fit and how to have the strength to consciously choose how you want to spend your time. And indeed, as I've mentioned in the past, when you are spending your time and living your days according to what other people need or want from you, and you aren't setting healthy boundaries, a couple things happen. One is you can get resentful. And when you get resentful, these 4 toxins start to show up. Again, these toxins show up in relationships all the time. It's when they become pervasive and more present than having a healthy, positive response that they become a problem. The other thing that happens when you don't set healthy boundaries and create a life you love and schedule around what's most important and essential to you is your energy can go down. You find you're spending your time and energy focused on what other people want instead of what you want. And so in the webinar, we're going to look at how to have the strength to be able to set healthy boundaries, to be able to have the courage to say no, and how to do it in a way that it doesn't damage the relationship, that you can stay engaged, while also honoring what you need. Because when you can coach yourself to a life you love, you have greater energy, and you have an ability then to do those things in your life that you want to be doing that bring the greatest joy and passion. So I hope that you'll sign up. I'll put the link below in the comments for the webinar. And if you join on the webinar, live, when it's happening on August 23rd, next Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Central Time, you're going to be put in a drawing to receive a free coaching strategy session. This is a $650 value with one of the coaches on my team. And it's 2 hours for you to be able to jump into a conversation with a certified professional coach about whatever topic in your life you want, where you might feel stuck, or you might feel like you've got some idea of what you want to do, but you don't know where to start, or your saboteurs and gremlins are getting in the way. So I invite you to join me live so that you can be put in the drawing for a free 2-hour strategy session. And if you can't, you can still register below and sign up, and you'll get a link afterwards to the webinar so that you can listen to the recording. The other benefit of joining live is I'm going to take Q&A and be able to answer your questions in the moment. And personalize whatever it is that you want to ask, of where you might be getting stuck in your life and being as thoughtful as possible. I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday and also next Thursday for my Thoughtfully Fit Live, where I'm going to be talking a little bit more about coaching. How can you coach yourself to a life you love? What's different with coaching than being a mentor, or working with a consultant, or being in therapy, or frankly having a friend? I have some people say, now, isn't coaching like just having a paid friend? So if you're curious about what this whole buzz is about coaching and what it is and how you can coach yourself to a life you love, I invite you to join me next week. And then in 2 weeks, I'm going to talk about coaching teams and systems. So if you are a leader in an organization, or you've got a role in a nonprofit or in your family where you want to bring some of these coaching skills forward to help that team and that system, that relationship improve. I'm going to talk about that in 2 weeks. So I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday for the webinar, or every week after that for my Thoughtfully Fit Live Thursday. Thanks so much for joining me, and good luck with your homework. Enjoy your weekend.